Greetings, Guardians, my name is Bife here. So, even in the moments where I think I know something pretty definitively, I'll always need to sit there and reassess. Back when I summarized the 10-year finale, I made as much of a point. I make mistakes, and I think that I might have made a mistake with some of my assertions there, although maybe it's just that I need to clarify some things and add context. And I say that because of the lore that we learn today, the lore of the Ergo Sum. There are really two sides to the lore of this weapon. There is the fact that we've interacted with it before and seen it as a portent of doom, and the fact that it was also a momentary sign of great hope, something gifted to us from the Traveler and which also gives us some of its own perspective. That perspective is what makes me possibly reassess some of what I believe, and more importantly, it gives us some insight into the idea of the Traveler generally, and also perhaps why it is so silent. But before we get to any of that, we need to get everybody on the same page, so for just a moment, I'm going to cast everyone's eyes back to the moment where we first saw the Ergo Sum, before we even knew its name or wielded it in our hands. And that was a moment that some of us who played the Season of Dawn will remember. This weapon was a portent of doom because it confirms a terrible truth. It was laid upon our grave, and we have not truly met our end yet. That moment must be ahead of us. So this icon of hope is not just that, it is also the reminder that one day we will die. For those of you that don't know this context, here it is. The Season of Dawn involved us rescuing Saint 14 from the Corridors of Time, an area where you could literally step back and forth in time thanks to Osiris, who used a device called the Sundial to access these corridors. This allowed us to literally change timelines. Prior to our intervention, Saint 14 had simply died, and with our intervention, we were able to find him in the Infinite Forest just in time to save him from the Vex, who had created a singular mind with the sole task of draining his light and his light alone. We rescued him from this so-called martyr mind by venturing through the corridors of time. But upon our own further investigations, when we looked more deeply into the corridors, we discovered something else. A time-lost vault. When we finally explored more and managed to breach the vault at its core, we discovered that at its center there was a tomb. This blade was laid on the top of that tomb, and as we heard Saint 14 giving a eulogy for one who was interred within, it was suddenly clear that this was ours. The fact that Ergo Sum rests upon our grave and the fact that we did not meet our ends at the hands of the Witness and its minions implies that there is a dark and terrible future ahead of us, and that this will one day be our fate. What could possibly cause our death is currently unknown, but the fact that we do die at some point in the future does imply that there is perhaps a more terrible threat than the Witness lurking on the horizon, a threat whose power exceeds anything we've seen before. Who knows what that might end up being? But what of the origins of this blade? Well, we get our first iteration of it from the Traveler itself. In the process of preparing ourselves to confront the Witness in Salvation's Edge, we go on a quest to start the process of healing the Traveler. At the end of this quest, we return to the site where we first faced the Witness, where its memory recreated the chamber where it unmade its many selves into something new. And here, sitting within an overflowing well of light, we saw this blade, a great weapon for a moment of need, a weapon to help us destroy the Witness and its dissenters. This weapon isn't just remarkable for the moment in which it was sent to us, but also because it is unquestionably a creation of the Traveler itself, a weapon of the purest light, capable of many forms based on our memories and of our greatest implements of war. Be they the Yalahorn, the Polaris Lance, the Risk Runner, or any number of exotic weapons, this blade can take its form and its power, reflecting some of those weapons. To be gifted with such a weapon is a remarkable thing, but what's more remarkable than this perhaps is the lore tab that is attached to the weapon itself. The reason for it being remarkable is simple. It appears to be from the perspective of the Traveler, and oftentimes it appears to be looking at major moments within its own history and its own timeline. Its name is also of some importance if you're to understand a little bit more about it. Ergo sum is Latin. I think some of you had picked that up already, but it's commonly seen as part of a larger phrase, namely cognito ergo sum, which translated from Latin roughly means I think therefore I am. This is the original philosophical idea of René Descartes, and it's basically a commentary on the idea that even if the whole of the world around you isn't real, the one thing you absolutely can be sure of is that you, right at this second, are thinking. And that means that you know you exist, because nothing can stop you from thinking unless you are dead. Therefore, you think, and you are. In the case of this sword, though, it is just the words ergo sum, which is just the I am bit, or the therefore I am bit of the phrase, if you were to mold it into the better-known phrase of Descartes. And if you take just the I am bit and combine it with the immediate flavor text of the blade ergo sum, you get I am silent, silent, silent. I think that matters given that, well, this is the Traveler's perspective we're about to read. Anyway, let's actually go ahead and do that instead of wittering on, because this goes through a bunch of different points, and I actually want to stop after each paragraph and do some analysis, because I think that's the most coherent way to do this. So with that in mind, this is the law of the ergo sum. It reads as follows. Silent, silent, silent. You are a child waking from a long and dreamless sleep. Is it still today, or have you slept into tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow, until the days buried you as much as the sand? Gentle hands brush away the grains, but your voice is so soft they cannot hear you over the sound of their own heartbeats. Our first paragraph appears to speak of the awakening of the traveler. The primary hint as to why I think this is the case is because of the sand that's referenced and how the speaker is supposedly buried within. The speaker of this particular lore tab is undoubtedly the traveler itself, as we'll see over and over again. But we also know from cinematics that the precursors first discovered the traveler in a buried state on their desert world. This again might imply that the precursors were truly the first to see the traveler's bounty ever, if that earlier assertion is true at least. And it does bring about that idea that the traveler was created at some point out of the creation myth of the gardener and the winnower, and that the first knife that the winnower would make in response was the witness, thus implying, again, that the precursors were the first people who ever encountered the traveler, hence why it was found buried on their world and not simply floating out in space like every other civilization saw it. The next paragraph reads, You are a moon. You feel heavy, so heavy, but to the stargazer you hang weightless in the sky. When the stargazers call out, you do not answer. They would give themselves up for you, abandon their own dreams to chase you. You love them too much to condemn them so. In this paragraph, we see a note about civilizations chasing the traveler, and unfortunately, that doesn't give us any clear indications of who this civilization might be. Both the Eliksni and the Hive have done so, after all, and technically, even the precursors did, given their creation of the Witness, which did exactly that. It pursued the traveler across the universe. However, I don't think this is the precursors. The idea of them abandoning their own dreams seems to rule them out. The term dream here implies that the civilization had a purpose of some kind, and that the precursors therefore can't be it, because, well, they had all the bounty of the traveler, but they didn't have that strong societal purpose that united or defined them. The term stargazers might be in reference to the proto-hive, aka the Krill. The old Osmium king would invite his eldest heir into his orrery, in other words, a place where you observe the stars, and they would observe the 52 moons of Fundament in their place. The being who would one day be known as the Taken King Oryx was amongst those two. Back then they would have been known as the child Orush. Then again, the stargazers supposedly called out to the traveler, just as one Eliksni quite notably did in their history. Chelchis, the Kell of the House of Stone, who did so as Rhys was being destroyed. He called out, saying, "Where is the Great Machine?" The Great Machine being the Eliksni's equivalent of the Traveler. And in that moment, the Great Machine was gone. But the phrasing of this moment just doesn't seem to fit either of those particular points in history, be it Hive or Eliksni, and it's purely because in both instances these civilizations thought that they were in a moment where they were experiencing apocalypse. In the case of the Eliksni, it was very real. In the case of the Proto-Hive, it wasn't. This passage is therefore mysterious to me because I just can't place who this would be, and what society it would be. Even as the Stargazers call out, there is no obvious answer as to who this was. This passage is something maybe you'll know a little bit more about. Let me know in the comments. Maybe you know better. The next passage reads, "You are a lighthouse keeper. You are watching over a sleepy coastal village as the storm clouds roll in. And you are flashing the signal lantern, faster and faster and brighter, but they do nothing. You are trapped on an island, in a tower, signaling desperately that it is coming. And still they do not run. They are going to die. And if you do not run, you will die too." Something important to note about this passage is that the I in it, as in signaling desperately that it is coming, is capitalized, which means that it is not some minor word there, it is actually a thing, it is representative of something. It is also commonly something that's been used to refer to the great darkness that encroached upon Sol, which we now almost certainly know was the Witness. And therefore, it probably is the case that the it in this particular sentence is referencing the Witness chasing the Traveler. It's perhaps then possible that this is a reference to any number of civilizations that have seen the doom of the Witness as it arrives, be they the Eliksni or the Ammonite or anyone else. The idea of the Lighthouse Keeper and the Signal Lantern are vivid images, and they do remind me of a civilization destroyed by Oryx in the Books of Sorrow. Civilization that were blessed by the Traveler, known as the Harmony. They had a construct known as the Gift Mast created within their system. It was a great spear of light that skewered a black hole where their sun should be. It prevented the civilization from being consumed by the black hole and allowed them to live in harmony. But even in that case, the it in question, namely the Witness, wasn't the primary destroyer of the Harmony worlds. Oryx and his swarm was. Regardless, this expresses the Traveler knowing that it must flee in the face of the Witness, and that, as it tries to warn civilizations in the path of this oncoming doom, they can't hear it, and so they will inevitably perish. I don't know if this is to do with the Harmony or not, that's just a guess, but whatever the case, this civilization that is being referenced undoubtedly did fall. The next passage, however, seemingly puts a stop to the idea that anyone will fall, and it brings us to what I think is a familiar place. You are leaning out over the ocean. Sometimes the fish brush against your fingers and believe that they have felt the divine. Sometimes the tide recedes and the fish do not know you except by your absence. And today, you strive with all your might to reach the water, because it is here. The great dark shadow of the shark parting the water like a knife. And you cannot warn them, but you must try. You cannot bear to lose even one more. I think based on the last sentence of this, we can tell that this is a note about the collapse, Earth and humanity. You cannot bear to lose even one more is the key phrase here. It seemingly also confirms that the Traveler did indeed sacrifice itself to save us in the collapse. I think there's also an important point made in this paragraph, and it's in reference to the fish. These fish that brush against your fingers and think they've felt the divine might be a representation of humans, more specifically a special group of humans known best to us as speakers, although in the Golden Age, they would have been known as dreamers. They would involuntarily hear the voice of the Traveler and would understand some of its messages in waking dreams beyond their control. I think the idea of fish brushing against the fingers of the supposedly divine being fits that analogy quite well. I think the witness is mentioned here again with the presence of the capitalized "it" returning. It's also described as a shark parting the water like a knife, which in itself is imagery portraying the idea of the first knife quite well. The next passage reads, "You are carrying a tower of books. If you recited one title each second, you would not finish before the heat death of the universe. And every year, every day, every minute, its hands add more to the pile. A man reaches for one of the books. For you. And you want so very badly to reach back, to take his hand and tell him that you must bear it just like he must, forever. The memory engraved in quartz. But your hands are full." This passage is a curious one, but I think it does refer to the burden of death that the traveler is carrying. Once again, the capitalized "it" appears in the sentence. Its hands add more books to the pile. This is perhaps a note about all the beings that the witness has killed or finalized, and all the beings that the traveler is mourning. Then again, if the light lives in all things and all places, then perhaps this is an analogy for the souls of those who have died and have fallen in the path of the witness, being passed back into the traveler, the weight of their suffering and their memories and their lives being passed onward. The man reaching out to take one of the books from you in this reference could be any number of things, but the way in which the permanence of his burden is described and how the gardener is powerless to stop him makes me question a lot about what this could be. My initial thought was that this was the guardian and their ghost, or maybe any guardian and any ghost, reaching out to bring back one of the worthy dead, knowing that they would also shoulder the burden of the light and immortality until their true final death. But the idea of the traveler being helpless to stop them from taking those books from the metaphorical pile is an odd one in that case, because, well, the traveler made the ghosts. So why then is it portrayed as being powerless to stop someone from taking the books? Why does it need the books? Why are the books a burden? Why is it something that's going on continually? This one is a mystery to me as well. Maybe I am missing something. If you have your own interpretation, please let me know. The next passage, however, is incredibly explicit in its meaning, and I think it's very easy to explain. It reads, "You are a prisoner. The cage is so small that you can barely breathe. He screams at you to share your gift. You do not give it to anyone who thought of it so. It is a burden, a terrible weight that you've already asked too many to bear, to be crushed by. You could say all this and more. You do not." I think there's only one moment in the timeline that adequately fits this moment. I think the one screaming at the traveler to share its gifts is Dominus Gaul, and that the cage so small that the traveler could barely breathe is in fact the cage used by the Cabal to cut the Guardians off from the light. The traveler famously wouldn't share the light with Gaul, which led to his Cabal attempting to extract the light from it manually. This is probably the clearest point in the timeline from this entire excerpt. Next, we read, "You are reaching over a chasm, into which countless paths feed like arteries. You are trying to reach the people on the other side, but you cannot bridge the gap alone. You watch them turn, one after another, to walk down, down, down into the abyss, until it consumes them entirely. You are surprised as anyone else when one of those wanderers comes back up the path, still reeking of decay, and reaches back to you." I don't exactly know what's going on with this one, but the idea of a wanderer returning, reeking of decay and reaching back to the traveler almost seems to indicate the idea that this is a moment showing Guardians turning to darkness. The idea of one turning back and reaching back might be indicative of us. Equally, this might be Crow, who in the time of Beyond Light, when Guardians were universally embracing stasis, was instead finding his purpose in the light, being guided by Hawkmoon. But then again, he never claimed the powers of darkness, so it might not refer to him at all. I think the corruption point here is very clear, simply because yet again, until it consumes them entirely is referenced. Yet again, the capitalized I in it implies that it's the witness being spoken of here. This passage is somewhat unclear, but I feel like I might be missing further meaning somewhere here as well. Is it possible this is a wider reference than just Guardians? Is this looking at the idea of species generally being consumed by the witness and its darkness? Is this an indication of individuals falling to its side and the disciples? Maybe this is a commentary on the fate of Savathun, the Witch Queen. In fact, maybe this is the best analogy for her. After all, she was a wanderer upon the world of Fundament. She came back up the path of the light, having freed herself of her worm, and she sat before the traveler in her moments of death, which would satisfy the idea of reeking of decay, and the idea of many individuals walking down, down, down into the abyss until it consumes them entirely might be representative of the idea that the Hive are indeed embracing darkness generally. I don't know, but maybe Savathun's story does also fit in here. Regardless, this is showing an extreme moment where some who had embraced darkness were able to reach back to the light. The last two paragraphs show us what I think is a very clear moment, the moment at which a sword is crafted at last. They read as follows. You are drowning. The water roils, dragging you down, and you are tired, so tired. The deep, dark ocean has gotten into your lungs, droplets of ink dispersing in silver blood. This time, you think, this time it has won. But when you look up, you see a figure diving toward you, fighting their way down through the suffocating waves, reaching out just like you've reached to them so many times before. You have so little strength left, but you do have it. That last gasp of air in your chest. You reach back, and in your hand is a sword. This last paragraph is a display of the events that have occurred since the portal was made at the end of Lightfall. The darkness of the Witness's corruption has spread into the Traveler. We know from Micah that this is changing the Traveler, but that it's only the presence of the Witness that is truly wounding it. Regardless, this description shows that change in a negative light, perhaps, and it shows us maybe that the Traveler seemingly believed that the Witness had succeeded this time. That is, until a Guardian stepped into the picture. And I believe, of course, that this is the moment at which it's referencing us. Fighting through the suffocating waves seems to reference us fighting through darkness and the minions of the Witness to reach and free the Traveler. It also indicates that this individual, the Guardian reaching back, us, is one who has been reached out to countless times before by the Traveler, which fits the bill for us given that we have received multiple visions from it. We were guided to the Shard of the Traveler in the EDZ at the onset of the Red War. We were guided back to Io at the start of Forsaken to receive our new powers, and we even saw the visions of Crow alongside him as we guided him on his path to become a Guardian. The Traveler reaching back to us and giving us a sword is the confirmation we need to say definitively that this blade, the Ergo Sum, is an acknowledgement that it hears us and that this blade was given to us by the Traveler itself. There is also a philosophical line that we need to draw on here. In my previous video, I came to a conclusion about the reason why the Traveler is silent, and that it's because, whilst it has its own will, it wants us to be able to make our own fates and futures. To a great extent, I still believe that, but a lot of what I've read here casts a new light on my own thoughts. The Traveler in these passages is actively reaching out, trying to be heard, and it has never been heard because its voice is too quiet. It actively is seeking to reach out, but it also doesn't want to burden those of us that have been uplifted with the light. It says as much in this passage. According to those passages, it doesn't want us to be burdened and therefore have to abandon our dreams. I still hold my previous opinions, but I think that the Traveler's actions are now better characterized. In some instances, it is so compromised that it has been forced to act and to aid us, and perhaps to compromise its own original purpose and to guide us. Even as there's that passage describing the fish brushing the fingers of the Traveler, it's showing that the actions of us hearing its voice are more of an involuntary thing, not intended by either party. I think the entire theory is mostly sound, but nuance needs to be added, and I do think that it's worth pointing out that maybe the Traveler has directly intervened in a few moments. Most importantly of all, Crow. He was given a purpose directly by the light, shown to us by Hawkmoon, a gift that, whilst shown to him through metaphor, did allow him to land on his singular purpose as a Vanguard member and a Guardian, something which he has now fulfilled. More importantly, perhaps, this was one of those moments that shows the Traveler was compromised. If it had to compromise its own principles just once, it was with Crow, because of the fact that he had to pass through the portal. He was the only one who had a connection to Mara, meaning he was the only one that would be able to allow us to travel through unharmed and unhindered. Regardless, the one thing we can't seemingly dispute is that these passages describe the story from the Traveler's perspective, and that is a rare thing indeed, something we shouldn't take for granted, and something we should observe from here on out. So, hold on to that sword for now. I know you'll most certainly do so, if only because of the fact that one day, you will take it with you to your grave. When the next threat raises its head above the horizon, it may be the thing that sends you there for good. Who knows? But that's all from me for now. Let me know your own thoughts about your interpretation of Ergo Sum down below in the comments section. In particular, I'm fascinated by those moments where I wasn't clear on things. Perspective is important here, and more often than not, when I can't connect the dots, someone out in the audience can. So I'm fascinated to hear what all of you have to say. Also know that if you enjoyed the video, you can hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. And again, thank you so much for the incredible support over the last month or so. We have seen an enormous amount of new people jumping into the channel's content and jumping into Destiny generally. And if you are new, to you I say welcome. It's wonderful to have you here. But in the meantime, know that your viewership as always has been quite enough for me, and that in the meantime, my name is Byf. Rodacia ad Astra. I'll see you, Starside.